just so you know. So if you're out there, and all you've got on is a shirt and you don't want to appear in the video, then just be sure to not appear in the video. You could set yourself up so you don't. Anyway, yeah, wouldn't want to embarrass anybody by including them in a video that gets posted on YouTube and all that. So anyway, I'm just sort of checking out to see who people is here. And again, I've got 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 17, but there's 23, so I'm missing. I am definitely missing people, so let's see who it is. Who am I missing? Well, again, I forgot. Somebody is logged in twice. So let's see who might be here. Missed. All right, I don't want to stress out about it. I feel like most the really important people are here, right? Everybody who's here, the really important people are definitely here. So it is kind of discouraging in a certain sense to be learning online like this. I think it's a struggle for lots of people, and I know this because I've gotten emails from my students in my other classes in which they are just upset, and they're not upset at me because they're really just upset at the entire crazy situation that we find ourselves in. Now, one thing that has come to mind, or they made a note and asked me to announce in classes, is that that fall registration starts a week from today. So fall registration starts a week from today, and certainly Pima College is super concerned about that. I mean, enrollment is what keeps Pima Community College going. The state of Arizona doesn't give Pima College any money anymore. They used to. But now they rely on enrollment, and they rely on, property taxes and those kinds of things. Of course, they want people to enroll, but, they can't really tell us what the fall is going to look like. They really can't. They don't know. My general sense, and I'm sad to say this, is that they're not. They're talking about not having face-to-face classes in the fall, and maybe something amazing will happen, and it will allow us to come back to face-to-face classes in the fall. But I absolutely, I'm hoping that that's the case, but I'm not optimistic about it just based on everything that I have been reading and hearing about it. So that means that when you think about enrolling in the fall, you're probably going to be thinking about doing more classes like this. Okay. And so for better or for worse, I know for a fact that I have students who are so discouraged by this that they are simply they're not showing up to class anymore. So please don't do that. If you stay in this class, do as much of the work as you can, come to class, so that I know that you're here and you're paying attention, you're taking attendance. Believe me, I'm going to do my best to give out good grades to reward people for their attendance and their work and all that. So, I don't want to go on the record and say, look, I'm just going to give out nothing but A's, because I don't think I can do that. But the bottom line is that people who are here in this class, paying attention, doing the work they can, they're not going to fail this class. Okay, that I can say. You're not going to fail this class if you are in here. And the bottom line is that I'm going to do my best to give people the best possible grades I can. So be patient. Now, my other classes, it's a little bit harder for me because those people are in a career path that requires more rigorous grading, really, than this class does. So what was I thinking about? I know what I was thinking about a minute ago is I was thinking about the documents that were posted on my Pima. And I'm assuming everybody can see exactly what I'm doing right now because I'm going to our class, Environmental Biology. I'm going to the drive. Once I'm on the drive, I'm going to go to Handouts and Posts. And as Caitlin was nice enough to point out, there's 29 documents now. So you can't find all those documents on the first page that you come up and see. You simply can't. And since I'm loading things up front to make them easier for people to get, it's pushing other things back. So what you have to do is you need to go up here where it says items per page, and look, just set it for 50. I think I know it says there's only 29. But one thing I have not done yet is I haven't posted quiz number 16. I was working on it during the break. I'm revising it, but take a look. I'm going to scan on down, way down, almost to the end, because there's the ecological footprint assignment. And it is up to date. It was great that a student mentioned to me earlier that I had an out of date link here. So really, you go through the ecological footprint, you fill out the data, and it's pretty straightforward, I think. So here's the thing. Let me just mention this to people who are working on this. It's going to tell you how many planets that you would need if everybody lived like you. And don't be surprised if you discover it would take 5 planets, because we live in the U.S. and in the U.S. we are the #1 consumers on the planet. And so when I think as soon as you tell them that you're in the United States, they just automatically start at 3 planets. Now, this question number 5, it says if everybody lived like you, the maximum number of people who would be supported by Earth forever is. And so what you're going to really do is you're going to take the number of people on Earth today, and it's fine if you want to round to 8 billion, 7.8-ish billion, and then divide that number by the number of planets. So let's just say it took 4 planets to support you. 8 billion divided by 4 planets means that on this planet we exist on now, that all we could support would be 2 billion. And of course we have 8 billion. So what that sort of says is, if everybody wants to live like you, hey, and like me too, I'm not pointing any fingers here. If everybody wanted to live like me, then we could only have 2 billion people on the planet, and we are close to 8 billion now. So what that means, I think, is that many, many people are not going to be able to live like me, And so anyway, I think it's worthwhile to see how, if everybody wanted to live like you, how many people we could actually have on the planet. But there's the ecological footprint assignment. Anybody who needed it, it's there. It's just, if you didn't reset the number up top, then you might not see it. Now, I mean, the reality is that when it comes to this kind of thing, you can toggle it up here for sure, or you can also go over here and just look at nothing but the second page. You're going to get the same effect. Believe me, there's going to be new things posted on this. We're approaching 30 now, and there will be other things before the semester is over. So for sure, you're going to need to toggle it up to 50 or do it the other way. Okay, I'm just going to go back home here for now. And I'm going to come back to our meeting. Okay, here I am back at our meeting. Don't need this, I don't think. I am recording, I am presenting. All right, great. And I did take a look at what was going on, the chatter that was going on in the chat box, and have had an opportunity to take care of it. So I mentioned fall enrollment a week from today. And, it's hard to know, as I said, exactly what that's gonna, look like in terms of face-to-face classes, lab classes, and that kind of thing. Anyway, the only other class that I teach is Bio 156, which is not a class that most people who are enrolled in Bio 105 would ever want to take. It's a cell and molecular biology class that's designed for nursing students and health-related professionals. And it is a much more difficult class, though it's hard to know what it's going to look like in the future. They are putting together completely, fully online Bio 156 classes, and it's hard to know what those are going to be like. All right, so I mentioned what I was supposed to mention. Like I said, I'm keeping track of everybody here, and all right, like I said, though, one thing I did not post is something that I do need to post, which is the newest quiz. But believe me, I will post it before I will post it when we are done today, if I don't post it before that some magical way. All right, so I'm hoping everybody can see this. It does say I'm recording and I'm presenting, and so where was that? I don't need this anymore down here. This, and this is our meeting down here. And I lost that PowerPoint, but I hope everybody is well. I hope everybody had as good a weekend as possible under the circumstances. I saw some wonderful video of people on the beach, spaced 6 feet apart, and it made me think it would be nice to be on the beach, spaced 6 feet apart. Most of the time when I think of going to the beach, I think of going to Rocky Point. And honestly, in the beaches in Rocky Point, it's not any problem to be 6 feet apart. Those beaches can be pretty empty. I'm not even sure you can go back and cross the border right now. I don't know. I don't know if I could go to Rocky Point and then come back from Rocky Point. I don't know. But when I saw those images, I thought, oh my gosh, now that looks almost like normal life. It was in California. People were spreading themselves out pretty clearly on the beach. And I think to myself, well, as long as you're 6 feet apart, you're not sneezing on each other or coughing on each other, you might as well enjoy the beach. And I'm kind of hoping that viruses don't like the beach. I don't really know that. The reality is that there are lots of viruses on land, but there are lots more viruses in the ocean, but not COVID-19. So anyway, I hope well, and you're taking all the precautions that you can. I know in Pima County, yesterday they were announcing there were 1,000 cases, and I'll bet you today there's going to be more than that. When we speak about the virus reproducing, it is true that when you look at some of this viral reproduction stuff, you realize that viruses under the right circumstances can clearly grow exponentially. And that's kind of scary because, you could have 1,000 people today, and if it was to grow exponentially, you could have 2,000 tomorrow and 4,000 the next day, and all those kinds of things that just are crazy. But I think if this is a different way to look at it, but if we're interested in looking at the virus as if it was behaving in a biological way, we could say that what we're trying to do by social distancing is prevent the virus from growing exponentially. Because once things grow exponentially, then it is just crazy. Remember when we talked about the growth of the population in Bangkok and how it went from 500,000 to 1 million to 2 million to 4 million, and really not in that many years. In 50 years, it went from 500,000 up to about 5 million. And that's definitely a kind of exponential growth. And it's human exponential growth. So, I think you could maybe argue that humans are not going to grow exactly the same way as other organisms that have been studied. And so that might be the case. I'm going to show you a short video tonight with this guy, Julian Simon, who I've always thought was a very interesting thinker, philosopher, economist that has ideas about population growth that are different, really, and interesting to hear. This is a short video that I have of his. So anyway, the bottom line is that we're trying to flatten the curve and prevent the virus from starting to grow exponentially. I don't think it's growing exponentially now. The kind of growth we've seen where it's crept up until it's hit 1,000, that is not exponential growth yet. That's in the arithmetic kind of growth. Once it hits exponential, oh, you'll know it, because it'll be 1,000 Monday and it'll be 5,000 on Friday, and that's the beginning of exponential growth. Let's hope we don't get to that place in Pima County. And I mean, if there's one good thing about the temperature now, is that there's at least one hypothesis out there that the virus doesn't like high temperatures. And anyway, you know, viruses are not living things. So maybe it wouldn't be good for me to say that they like things or not. Viruses are not classified as living things because they don't exhibit all the characteristics of living things. I mean, a perfect one would be reproduction. Without a living thing to essentially parasitize, then the virus can't reproduce. It has to infect cells and commandeer those cells like pirates and just take over the cell and turn the cell into a factory that makes new viruses. And that's one reason it's not a virus. Viruses don't really seem to you know, there's all kinds of reasons why it's a little bit weird to talk about viruses as if they were living things, but there are certain behaviors they have that definitely we could view from a lens of the way living things behave. Anyway, so if anybody has any questions, of course, please just jump on in. I mean, some people keep apologizing, going, Steve, I'm sorry to interrupt. Hey, feel free to interrupt me. I am happy to answer questions or explain things better. I mean, I have to say, like I said to a couple people in the last class, they interrupted me and they apologized. I said, don't apologize. When somebody interrupts me, I at least know there's somebody out there listening. Because as it is right now, I have this picture in my head of all these people. They're logged in, they're laying in bed, and they're snoring. And I can't hear them snore. They got their microphones off. But anyway, I don't really feel like I'm at my best in this kind of scenario. So I'm just doing my best to finish the semester so I can give people grades so that nobody has to put up with Bio 105 again. Okay, so let's go to this PowerPoint. And this is the same PowerPoint as we were using last time. And here's a new, here is, you know, a new slide that talks about you know, what we're going to do today and next time to one degree or another. So this slide is called Coronavirus Lectures 9 and 10, April 27th and 29th. I think I'm going to probably finish this PowerPoint tonight, and then we'll have a brand new one next time to look at. This PowerPoint is posted as document number 0014. Now look, here's something completely new, and I just figured out how to do it today. Because people were telling me they're having trouble accessing my YouTube posts. So here it is now. I've made all the YouTube posts searchable on YouTube. And it seems to me as if this is the best thing to put in. You want to put in Bio 105 Lectures, Stephen Mackey. And when I did that, it took me right to a list of my lectures. Now, what you don't want to watch is my lectures for Bio 156, unless you are really having trouble sleeping at night and you just want something to help you sleep. But if you search for, if you go on YouTube, you know, youtube.com, and you put in the search line, Bio 105 Lectures, Stephen Mackey, you should get access to the lectures that have been posted so far. And so I will do my best to get this one posted. As quickly as I can. Oh my gosh. I keep wanting to check and remind myself which one it was, but last week I gave a lecture, and then it came to me in an email maybe a few hours later, and then I downloaded it to my computer and I started uploading it to YouTube. And I think it was on Friday I started uploading it, and I swear it didn't finish uploading until like midday Sunday. I'm not kidding. Crazy. And so when I went to it, I just couldn't believe it took so long to upload. And then I realized when I looked at the video that it was 8 hours long. And I thought for a second, did I lecture for 8 hours straight? That's crazy. Not impossible, but crazy. And no, that wasn't true. It was like at the end of the video, I guess I forgot to turn the recording off. And so it recorded for another 5.5 hours, and all it recorded was nothing. It just recorded people's symbols, people who were still logged in or whatever. And it was 8 hours long. And now it is posted. You'll see it because it says 8 hours, 4 seconds or something like that. But let me assure you that you will not have to watch 8 hours if that's one of our videos, right? You won't have to watch all 8 hours. The beginning of it, about 2 hours and 15 minutes, is where everything is. And when you watch things on YouTube, of course, you can stop them and start them. You can zoom forward, you can zoom back. You're never going to have to watch that additional 5.5 hours of nothing. But it just, it just illustrated to me that I'm still kind of low on the learning curve when it comes to this kind of stuff. I didn't realize that you had to end the recording, or sometimes the stream stayed live and recorded for a few more hours. So I apologize, but don't worry, you don't have to watch that extra time if that's one of our lectures. All right, so just some mentions. Quiz 15 on ecosystem services is due today. All right, that's exclusively about ecosystem services, pretty straightforward. Quiz number 16, which is not posted yet, I'm pretty sure. I double-checked this. On population ecology is due on Wednesday. It's not a real long quiz. And then quiz number 17 will be posted on Wednesday, too. So, yeah, but this one I'm going to post today. It'll be due on Wednesday. And then the next quiz, which is on it's on human population. It's quiz 17. That one's kind of fun because I'm asking you to create a population growth plan, and we'll talk about that today because I extracted some data from the Population Reference Bureau's data sheet that suggests some humane ideas about how to create a population growth plan. But I surely hope people will remember back to that video we watched called It Needs Political Decisions. That video had people talking about population control in Zimbabwe and in Bangkok. And so you got a chance to sort of see what those countries were doing to reduce population. And their population growth plans are, I would say, pretty humane. I mean, when I say humane population growth plan, I sort of think it includes not killing everybody 65 or older like me, just to reduce the population. Because I happen to be a member of a unique population bubble called the baby boomers. I was pretty close to the end of the baby booming time, but I'm definitely a baby boomer. And that is a big population of, some of them are elders, that is still alive and kicking as far as I know. So ecological footprint assignment is due today. The population ecology quiz will be due next time. It'll be posted as document number 0015. I don't think I've posted it already. And as far as ecological footprint goes, look, don't stress about it. If you didn't get a chance to do ecological footprint, then just do it and get it to me ASAP. Remember that the worst case scenario with that kind of stuff is that I deduct some points for lateness, and I never deduct more than 25% for lateness. Okay. Anybody got any questions about this right here? I hope somebody will actually now go and double check to make sure you can find these searchable lectures. As I said, it's a learning curve for me. Initially, they were unlisted, and I thought, well, now I have to tell everybody the link. And the links sometimes didn't work, sometimes they did work. So then I finally decided, that's it, it's enough. I'm going to make these things public. Believe me, these videos are not going to make me famous. They might make me infamous, I suppose, but they're not going to make me famous. But I think they're more available to my students who want to watch them again and again and again. Okay, so tonight's topic is human population ecology plus. And so what we want to do is go back to where we were. This is stuff that we already looked at. I'd be happy to imagine you're counting to 1 billion. It takes you 31 years. I don't really think that would be that fun to do. Again, when we look at the history of human population growth, oh my gosh. I mean, this is really exponential growth. When you go from 1 billion, to 8 billion in how many years? 1804 to 1904 would be 100 years, and then would be another 100 years. So you go from 1 billion, which took forever to get to be 1 billion, and then in 216 years later, you've got 8 billion. I mean, notice, wow. It took 50,000 years to get to 1 billion. It only took 123 years to get to 2. To get to 3 billion, it took 33 years, 14, 13, 12. And I'm not sure exactly what this number would be. But, this is exponential growth. I mean, when you look at how long it took to double, you go from 2 to 4. It took 33, 47 years to double. Okay, from 4 to 8, it took 14, 27, 39, 51 years to no, I guess that's right. I don't know exactly. Anyway, remember we talked about the rule of 70 and how you can use the rule of 70 to estimate population sizes. Remember what it said was that if you take 70 and you divide it by the percent annual growth, it will tell you how long it takes to double. So let's just say we knew the percent annual growth was 5%. 70 divided by 5 is 14. So it would take 14 years to double, right? That's the rule of 70. Now, this is sort of the slide we left off on the other night. We were talking about the rate of natural increase. We'll look at age structures a little bit. We're going to talk about total fertility rate, replacement level fertility rate, and we're going to just talk about some human population issues. Again, we were at about this graph when we cut up the other day, where here, this line represents births. And this line represents deaths. And I mean, for what it's worth, you can see that here was a big boom in births. Guess what? That's the beginning. That's right around the beginning of the baby boom. But since then, I mean, what happened with the baby boomers is a lot of people went off to World War II. It kind of changed society. When people came back from World War II, they immediately decided they were going to have a bunch of kids, and that includes me. I was in that group, right? Pretty high. Since then, the number of births has significantly gone down. This is worldwide, and really this number here is 19 per 1,000 people, but we don't need to worry about the 1,000 people. Now, again, death rates have also gone down. Notice that the death rate back in 1950 was close to 20 people per thousand dying, and now it's down to about 8 people per thousand. I mean, in one respect, if you think about it, people are dying less now, and that's a good thing. That means that's because of advances in medicine and advances in medicine and hygiene and nutrition and all those kinds of things. Less people are dying, in a kind of big population growth perspective than they were dying even 50 years ago, right? So people are dying less. But, it's like the difference between the number of births and the number of deaths, that is new mouths to feed, right? I mean, again, if you had 19 new births and 18 deaths, 19 minus 8 is 11. And then we're gonna, 19 minus 8 is 11. And that means that the percent annual growth is 1.1% worldwide, which sort of says, hey, 70 divided by 1.1 is probably about 65. The doubling time should be about 65 years. But I really think that, and I think that if we went back and we looked at the data, we would discover that that was true. Remember, doubling time, the first time we looked at doubling time, it doubled in about 50 years. And the second time, it doubled in a little over 50 years. And now it's taking more like 65 years to double. And I guess that's progress. The problem with doubling time is that it actually doubles. So, I mean, imagine, let's just say that right now, the population of the globe is 8 billion. It's not quite 8 billion, but the population of the globe is 8 billion. And let's say that this data is relatively representative, and we'll just say it's a 1% growth rate. 70 divided by 1 is 70. It's doubling every 70 years. Well, that sounds great. It doubled faster in the past. But what does that mean, really? It means if there's 8 billion people today, then in 70 years, there's going to be 16 billion. And 70 years after that, there's going to be 32 billion. And 70 years after that, there's going to be 64 billion. I mean, doubling time is kind of scary. It's what we do experience. Doubling times like that are what we experience when we're still seeing the remnants of exponential growth. So anyway, we're going to look a little bit at the population, some population data later, but this is kind of interesting because it really shows you that the relationship between how many new mouths to feed you have, it's totally related to how many new mouths are born and how many mouths have become deceased. Okay. So how do you calculate the annual growth rate? This I just sort of said. You're going to take, well, he's rounded it in this PowerPoint from 20 minus 8, it's 19 minus 8 times 100 equals 1.2%. And the rate of natural increase, if you look around the globe, kind of interesting, you look around the globe here, you see that, well, you actually see that there's pieces for which there's not much data, right? But there's also pieces like, they're like here in the US, right? Here in the US, we see that the rate of natural increase in 2011, at least, it looks to me to be in the 0.5%-ish range. So our growth rate, 0.5%. What that suggests is that if we had 350 million people in the US now, that it should take about 140 years, right? 70 divided by 0.5 to double to be 700 million. And I don't know, could the US support 700 million people? I don't know. Some of these other places, like here's Mexico right here, and it looks to me that Mexico's in the 1.3%. So that means that their population is going to double in about 65 years or so. Over here, look at these areas in Africa where it's 2.2%, which means, or 2.2% to 3.6%, kind of a range here. Let's just take an average and say it's about 3%. Well, 70 divided by 3 is 23-ish. So these countries, some of these countries are in the position where they will double in size. So they have 1 million in 23 years, 2 million, 23 years after that, 4 million, if that's in fact what happens. So one thing that is interesting to think about when we're thinking about population growth, we're talking about demography now, right? This is a word that I might as well put in writing, okay? And what it is the word is demography. And it equals population studies. So if I use the word demography, I want you to know what that means. It's this phrase demography means population studies, which is certainly what we're doing right now. And so one thing they talk about in demography is age structures. Like, take a look at this graph, because what this little chart is showing you is it's showing you, look over here on the side, it goes from very, very young people to pretty darn old people. The top over here looks to be, oh, I can't track across, but I'm going to try to track, oh, let's just say 85 to 89. So these are pretty old people. I can say that because I'm not 89 yet, right? And then these are young people, and this side is males and this side is females. So you can look at sort of, when you look at a chart like this, you can see the relationship between the number of males and the number of females, right? And at birth, they're about equal, but over time, the male population, well, I was going to say the male population declined faster than females, but you know what? When you look at this data, that doesn't really support this, right? But take a look. This is the kind of population growth curve that you see in places where there are tons of young people and not many old people. Young people, they are destined in many cases to reproduce. I mean, I'm like inclined to say it's basic biology that we're driven to reproduce. Oh yeah, I know it's true. Some people will decide they're never going to have any children. Some people will decide they're going to have 6 children. But the bottom line is that you have a certain amount of control over that, and but not perfect control over it by any means. I mean, the truth of the matter is that I would love to know the good hard data. It's difficult to get about what percentage of babies that are born were absolutely planned babies in which they said, okay, let's have a baby now. And then they went to Walmart and just bought one, right? And they brought it home. But I think we know that babies are cheaper at Walmart than they are at some other more expensive stores, but that's not actually how we get babies. So the bottom line is, I'm going to hypothesize. Remember, this is hypothesis. I'm going to hypothesize that 50% of the babies that are born are unplanned babies. There may even be babies that people said, you know, I'm never going to have any babies. But in the end, they ended up having babies. I'll bet you know somebody who has a baby that was a wonderful accident, let's put it that way, but was really a planned baby. So I think that when it comes right down to it, we look at a age structure like this, and you see lots of young people. Well, most young people believe that they have a right to reproduce. And I think most young people think that it's their human right to have as many kids as they want. I mean, I know people in the US who have 5 kids, which seems like a lot, but again, people feel like this is an inalienable, is that the right word? It's a human right to have as many kids as you want. Now, you may make decisions not to have as many kids, but if you look at a population and you create this graph and it looks like this, like a nice standard pyramid, then you have to think, wow, this is a population that is very likely to grow. Now, take a look at this kind of curve here, all right, in which, notice this curve, did I say curve? I meant to say curve. Notice that at the bottom of this, there's actually fewer young people than there is in the middle here. And these people are going to make decisions about reproducing. But where this bulge is right here, these are people that I would call, what a word, post-reproductive. They're probably not going to, they're probably not going to have more kids. So this is the kind of age structure that you would expect for a culture that is not growing as fast. There's actually, a significant number of older people. Now, here's where you see that as you get older and older, the male to female ratio goes down. But these people are all post-reproductive. In the reproductive ages, there's roughly equal numbers of males and females, and so lots of reproduction. Now, this particular curve shows a curve in which there's definitely, there are people who might want to reproduce, but it's a relatively small percentage of the population that is going to be reproducing. And there's lots of people that are kind of past the whole reproductive thing. And the society has a lot of middle-aged and older people, while this graph has lots of young people, small amounts of middle people, and less older people. Growth, again, I call this transitional. This is sort of transitioning from here to here, where this is a more mature with lower rates of reproduction that we would predict. Like it says at the bottom, if more people are in their reproductive years, birth rates will be high, except as influenced by income. And we'll talk about this later. Birth rates are lower as incomes increase. As people make more money, they have less children as a general rule. So, take a look at the scenario here, where here's the US back in 1950, okay? And notice that there's a significant number of young people, but there's this bulge right here, and this bulge is going to move up through time. It's the good old baby boomers. Now, this is in 2010. This is the estimation in 2010, in which this looks, like a sort of a more mature population, or transitional at least. Bottom line is that these age structures can help us identify which populations are likely to be growing and which are likely to be growing really fast and which are likely to be growing relatively slower. Now, the total fertility rate was defined before, but here it is down here. It's the average number of children born to a woman during her lifetime. And again, it's going to staffed out. Over here, there are some areas that I feel like we have pretty low data on. I personally have a little trouble telling the difference between this white and this. So up here, we don't have it. But this, I'm going to jump right to here and say the United States is about 1.9 total fertility rate. Now, what does this mean? Well, this is the average number of children born to a woman during her lifetime. But the last time I checked, women who have children really represent a couple. And a couple is not 1.9 people, it's 2.0 people. So if on the average, people are only having 1.9 children, then that is the sign of a sign of a shrinking population, right? Because look, if on the average people don't have 2 children, then they're not really replacing themselves. Oh yeah, there could be people having 6 children, but then what this really means, I think, is that there are more people choosing not to have any children at all, and that's why our population is growing relatively slowly. But then there are places where, again, down here in some of these African states where, take a look, 4.7 to 7.1. The average number of children born in some of these countries is 7 children per woman, meaning 7 children per couple. So there was a couple of a man and a woman, there were 2, and then they had 7 children. They way more than reproduced themselves. I mean, again, this anecdote is not something I would lock in concrete, but I had a student in environmental biology 5 years ago who told me that he had 60 brothers and sisters. His dad had 60 children. Now, there was more than one mom involved, which is good, because I can't imagine what it'd be like to have 60 children, though the Guinness Book of World Records for children born to a single female is still 69, and all you would have to do is have 70 to be in the Guinness Book of World Records for probably 100 years. Sorry, guys, it doesn't count for you. You can't get in the Guinness Book of World Records by fathering 500 children, I don't think. Maybe you could. So there are some interesting patterns in total fertility rate. So when we, look at the pattern of the world, kind of break down the world in terms of the population, total fertility, and what percentage of the population is having replacement level fertility, and what percentage of the population is having higher than replacement level fertility. Notice that that right around now there's a pretty big variation. I mean, here's people who are just barely replacing themselves. People who are having a little bit more. Way down here, right? This is a couple having 6 or more children. And we live in a time, which is, right over here, where there are still countries in the world where people are having lots of children. What they're hoping over time, and they're projecting over time, is that more and more of the world will come to a place where they're just replacing themselves. And some of these countries that really have high levels of births are going to decide to have fewer and fewer births. I mean, remember Bangkok? We saw that video on Bangkok, and that video on Bangkok, it showed they had a really ultra high birth rate, but then they decided that was, that they were worried about it for lots of different reasons. Like they were worried about social unrest, they were worried about jobs, they were worried about medicine. And so they made a very conscientious move to try and get people to have fewer kids. One way you can encourage people to have fewer kids is just to encourage them to have kids later in life. The person who's going to have the highest total fertility is someone who starts having kids at age 18 and has kids from age 18 until age 38 or something like that. They're going to have a lot more kids. They're going to contribute a lot more mouths to feed to the population than somebody who starts having children at age 30. You're going to have less children then. Believe me, I know that that's the case. Anyway, so the current population growth rate of the planet overall about 1.2%. And that means that as things look now, we expect a doubling time the planet to be up there around, say, 65 years and whatever. What's the plan? Essentially a graph like this is just projecting different future possibilities. Are we going to get down to very low levels of fertility, or are we going to continue to have pretty high levels of fertility so that in a few years we've got 27 billion people, 27 billion, 8 billion people right now. Now, for what it's worth, most of the actual population growth these days is in the less developed countries. In more developed countries, and I mean countries, like Sweden and Bangkok and Thailand and the U.S. and Canada, even Mexico, their growth rates are kind of leveling off, but there's still less developed countries. I mean, the one that I have to jump into, of course, would be the data we've already looked at about Africa, at where the total fertility rates are really high. And that means lots of babies, and babies want to reproduce. They feel like it is their human right to reproduce and have as many kids as they want. So really, though, it's interesting because you want to ask who has a greater impact on the environment: lesser developed countries, like some of those countries in Africa or in even South America, or more developed countries like the U.S. or China or these kinds of places, which has a greater impact on the environment. And really, here's the bottom line. In less developed countries, they've got a lot of people. 80% of the world's people are found in these lesser developed countries. In the more developed countries, we have what's sometimes called consumption overpopulation. We use 80% of the world's wealth. Sorry, I'm going to go back. So what does this mean? This is interesting, because if these people here in the least developed countries, they represent 80% of the world's population, but notice that the world's wealth and resources will, if more developed countries like the US use 80%, then it means there's only 20% left for these people. These are 80% of the world's people, but 20% of the resource consumption. Certainly, it's resource consumption that has a dramatic impact on the environment. These people have more people, but less consumption. These people, that's us, we are the biggest consumers with lower population. So we must be 20% of the world's people, 80% of the resource use. These are 80% of the world's people, but 20% of the resource use. This 80-20 thing is kind of scary, because a lot of people globally, they'd like to live like the more developed countries. They'd like to. And so they want to assume, sort of similar behaviors and practices. But the bottom line is that, in a more developed country where we're using much more of the world's wealth, and we are used to using it, it could end up being quite a struggle between people who want the world's resources and people who have the world's resources, and that's a little bit scary. So I think you probably could have guessed some of this. The world's most populous countries in 2015, this is China with 1.4 billion and India with 1.3 billion. All right. And then, these are the biggest ones, right? The biggest ones. And then other countries like the United States, 321 million. This was in 2015. It's now more like, I had it written before. I'm not going to go back, but I think it's 328 million. So anyway, and so some countries, they are just in 100 millions, but then there's countries with billions. And in 2050, they notice there's going to be a shift here, because India is going to outpace China. So there'll be 1.7 billion in 2050 if they continue to grow at the same rate. And the United States is going to say about where it is. The bottom line is that that the most populous countries are probably going to stay there. Honestly, I think in some respects these really populous countries they're still growing pretty fast. Population density really has to do with how packed in people are. And this graph, I'm sorry, it's not a little bit darker. It's actually a little bit harder for me to look at and see. So I'm not going to worry about it. The average annual rate of change. Well, this side of the graph, it's just got rate of change. Notice the numbers are, up here at 3%, and then the global population. And over time, we can see that in the more developed countries, that's us, notice over time our growth rate is going down. Right? In the least developed countries, their growth rate's going up. Maybe it's coming down a little bit now, but it's still pretty high. And then there's countries in between those where the population is growing at, a 2% population growth, right? That represents 2%. 70 divided by 2 is 35. When you are thinking about the rule of 70, wow, you think some of these populations could double in 35 years. But where we're down, close to 0.5, then our population would double in 70 years. So you count to 10. In these 10 seconds, 46 people were born, 18 people died, 28 people were added to the earth. 28 people added to the earth. So the difference between births and deaths always has to increase with population. During this class, give or take a little, about 44,480 people will be born, 17,440 die. That means 27,040 people added. So, population globally is absolutely, it is ticking forward, no doubt about it. So, again, I'm going to mention the rule of 70 with 1.2% annual growth we talked about before. You can use the rule of 70 to calculate out the time it takes to double. Now, this is a J curve, meaning an exponential growth. It occurs when the population is growing at a percent annual growth, something like 1.2%. It's not linear growth, meaning it's not that arithmetic growth. So take a look at this. This is crazy when you think about doubling, all right? We're going to start with imagining a piece of paper, good old 20-pound test, typical paper that I use for quizzes and all that, okay? So if you double it 10 times, you take one piece of paper and you double it 10 times, you're going to go from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, 16 to 32, 32 to 64, 64 to 128, 128 to 256. I lost track of how many times I doubled it, but I probably doubled it about that many times. Now, you double it 20 times. Whoa! It went from 3.9 inches to 332 feet. Double it 30 times, 64 miles thick. Double it 40 times, 65,943 miles. 50 times, 67.5 million miles. Now look, don't do this at home, please. Don't try and double your paper at home this way. This is more paper than you'll ever need. No one needs 67.5 million miles of paper. All right, I'm happy. Probably 3.9 inches would last me the rest of the year. Oh, that's not true, because I might generate quizzes and stuff like that. Anyway, this is just a perfect example of exponential growth. And we use the rule of 70 to determine doubling time. Remember, we take 70 divided by the percent annual growth. That equals the doubling time, how long it takes for the population to double. So here's an example, 10% annual growth rate. Current population is 1 million. How long will it take to reach 2 million? Well, it's 10% annual growth rate. So 70 divided by 10 equals 7 years to double. If it was growing at this rate, which is a pretty high rate, it would go from 2 million to 1 million it'd go from 1 million to 2 million in 7 years at a 10% annual growth rate, but it's doubling. 7 years to double, right? What about to go from 8 million to 1 million? Well, think about it for a minute. If it's doubling every 7 years, then we're going to start with 1, and we're going to double it in 7 years, it'd be 14. We're going to double it again. Take 1 million, double it to 2 million. There's 7 years. Then we're going to take 2 million, double it to 4 million. That's 14 years. Then we're going to take 4 million and double it to 8 million. So that's 3 doubles at 7 years per double. So if I screw this up, then you're going to be able to blame me. But my answer is 21 years. Okay, good. Hey, I'm glad I can figure this out as the one who's teaching this class. No doubt about it, right? That would be disappointing if I came up with 41 years. Anyway, this is all about worrying, about thinking about exponential population growth. So now we do have about a 1.1% annual growth. 70 divided by 1.2 is 58 years for the population to double in size. So it's 64 years. We'll have twice as many people on Earth at this rate. So where did I get these numbers? I don't know what I'm thinking. So right now, 8 billion, 58 years from now, we have 16 billion. It does make you wonder if we could support 16 billion. Will it happen? Can it happen? Well, you know, before I go to this, I would like to show you this short video. And it's by a guy that I think is a very interesting guy. His name is Julian Simon. And I actually think I'm going to do this. Okay. I apologize. I'm going to find this document, and I am, where is it? My computer's probably right over here. No, it isn't. Where did it go to? I don't know about your computer, but my computer sometimes decides I don't like the documents where they are. I'm going to move those documents around a little bit. So let's see. I think it's this one. Anyway, what I think we should do is we should take a 10-minute break. And when we come back from the 10-minute break, we're going to look at this video by this guy, Julian Simon. And I just want to throw him in there as okay, it didn't go to it, huh? I just want to throw him in there as a food for thought. Okay, that's what it really comes down to.
Most important
and so
that's occurred in the whole history of
we'll go to I'm going to drag this guy back. Thanks. Sorry, Julian. All right. And when we come back from our meeting, we'll go straight to Julian Simon, but we're on a 10-minute break right now. Okay, guys? 10-minute break. Don't fall asleep. I'm so happy to see there's so many people out there listening to me. I'm hoping it's not some kind of computer glitch. All right, but we're going to take a 10-minute break now. Be back in 10 minutes. All right, we're back. Good morning, class. I would love to answer any questions anybody has about, anybody has any questions about, why is this still here? I don't know. Oh, I better check. Am I presenting? Yes, I'm presenting and I'm recording, and I got to remember to cancel that recording as soon as we're done today. That's one lesson I've learned about YouTube. Anyway, if you are able to go and check out some of the YouTube videos, that would be wonderful. Though, honestly, I really think if you're here in class, it's best to be here in class. I mean, I know there are people in my other classes who are relying on me to post these videos, and they don't realize how long it takes to do that well. So anyway, I know we've done a lot of heavy-duty stuff, but let me find, where is Julian Simon? I just think it'd be interesting to run him and get his perspective. Okay, I think Julian Simon's dead, unfortunately. I would have liked to have had a discussion with him, but can everybody see this YouTube video? Would somebody just activate their microphone and go, yes, Steve, we see him?
Yes, we see him.
All right, thank you so much. Here we go. This is only 4 minutes long.
The most important, exciting event that's occurred in the whole history of civilization has occurred in the last 200 years in the richest countries in the world. 200 years ago in France, which was then the richest country in the world, the chance of a person who was born of living beyond the age of 27, 28, 29 was just about 50-50. That is, the life expectancy of the average person in the richest country in the world was less than 30 years. And it had been less than years for 10,000 years, 20,000 years, very, very long time. Very, very little had happened over the whole history of the human enterprise. And then just in the past 200 years, which is a mere blip in history, life expectancy at birth has gone up from under 30 to well over 70 in the rich countries in the world. And in the poorer countries in the world, another extraordinary achievement has occurred. In just the 30 or 40 years since World War II, life expectancy has gone up 15 or 20 years throughout the whole poor part of the world. So I ask you, has anything else that's ever happened in human history come close to this in its importance? This has meant that people have not only lived longer, but they're living healthier, they're living better lives. Our material lives, too, have been getting better rather than getting worse. The newspaper story you customarily read would tell you that we should be worrying about running out of natural resources, copper, wheat, what have you. But the history of the past 200 years, in fact, the whole history of humanity, has shown us the extraordinary event, contrary to all common sense, that the more that we use of natural resources, the more we have of them. That is, rather than natural resources becoming more scarce as we use them, they have been becoming more available. When I say more available, I mean that when we look at natural resources with the measure that we as economists use, and the measure that's important to us as consumers, that is, how much do we have to pay to get these resources? We see that the price of natural resources has been going down rather than up throughout all of human history. Let's take an example. If you want a ton of copper delivered on your front lawn, it would only cost you about 1/20th as much of the most valuable thing you have, which is your human time, to earn enough to buy a ton of copper as it did 200 years ago. And it will only take you about 1/2000th as much of your time now to earn enough to buy a ton of copper as it would have 4,000 years ago. And it's the same story with every single natural resource. It's the same with iron. It's the same with aluminum. It's the same, you name it, it's the same story that all of the natural resources, that includes all the foods, wheat and corn and rice, all of them have been becoming more available rather than more scarce, contrary to all common sense, all standard Malthusian thinking.
All right, I'm back. So, what was Julian Simon saying there? That was kind of interesting. Remember that when we think about most organisms, we think about the idea that their population is limited by resources. And you know, if you're talking about frogs in a pond, then the number of frogs a pond can support is directly related to the resources available. I mean, if you were able to calculate the carrying capacity of a pond for frogs, and let's say you found out that the carrying capacity of this pond for frogs is 30 frogs. Well, if 31 frogs were in that pond, it would have a detrimental effect, because if you're close to the carrying capacity, which it's better not to be close to the carrying capacity. If we have to choose, it'd be better not to live close to the carrying capacity. But if you're close to carrying capacity, resources available per organism are exactly a certain amount. If they don't get that resource, then they can't survive. I mean, that's what carrying capacity really means. It means, look, this is the maximum number of individuals that can be supported by this area forever. Not during the summer, not during the spring, not during fall, not during winter, but throughout the entire year and for year after year after year. So the bottom line is that when we look at a pond with 30 frogs in it, if that's the carrying capacity and there are 30 frogs, well, you know for a fact that there is not one bit of resource available to support a single other frog. So if you put another frog in there, it's going to be bad. If you put two more frogs in there, it's going to be bad, because now no frog is going to get what it needs to survive. And those frogs are going to start to lose weight. They're going to start to get weak. They might get diseased, etc. I mean, this is sort of common. Well, he used a word at the end of this. He used the word Malthusian. And he was referring to a pretty famous population guy named Thomas Malthus. I hope I'm right on his first name. I think I am. And Thomas Malthus was a guy back in the 1800s who suggested that populations were very limited by resources. What that meant is that if populations grow beyond a certain limit. What did I do here? I would much prefer to write this on the board. Limit. If population go beyond a certain limit, then populations will crash. So he was basically saying, look, here's the population, here's the biological processes, and honestly, I have no doubt whatsoever that this is true for frogs, it's true for elk, it's true for many biological creatures. The real question is it true for humans? And I think what Julian Simon would say, well, no, it's not true for humans. I mean, he used an example in a lecture that I heard of his where he said, look, if a barn can only support 30 mice, and you get 35 mice, then all the mice are going to suffer, and could potentially cause a population crash, right? Because mice in a barn, they've got a certain size barn and a certain amount of resources available, and that's it. But what he was just saying, in addition to saying how amazing it is that life expectancy has increased and the quality of life has increased, what he was basically saying is, despite the fact that we worry about resources becoming rare and less expensive, and more expensive, that in fact, when it comes to humans, that we can't really support that with data. It is there's something about the way humans operate in the environment that allows them, and I remember this is a quote from his lecture, to change the size of the barn. The barn's too small and we're running out of resources, we change the size of the barn. And you have to admit, humans have been pretty good at this, pretty darn good at it. I remember, back in the early 70s, or late 60s, actually, there was a book published by a very famous population biologist named Paul Ehrlich called The Population Bomb. And he was basically saying that the human population was growing so fast that within a few years, there would be massive worldwide famines and millions of people would die. And he was using a very typical biological model. And, and yes, there are people starving to death these days. There's no doubt about it. And it may number in the millions. But I mean, he was really projecting that globally there would be this massive famine, millions and millions of people would die, and we haven't seen that. So Julian Simon, who of course has a different model and says, hey, no, you know what? Humans are so smart that when resources become less available, they figure out more ways to get them. And they change the size of the barn, and they figure out new ways to get the resources, ways to use them better, faster, more efficiently, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I remember Simon and Paul Ehrlich were constantly arguing about this. And at one point in time, Julian Simon said, look, if you really believe this is true, then let's make a bet. And the bet is that you choose 5 resources that you think are going to become less available in the next 10 years, let's say, because the bet was 10 years long. The next 10 years are going to become less available because of human population growth. And you can choose them. Paul Ehrlich, you can choose them. And I'll go with it. They each put up $1,000. And Paul Ehrlich, he chose 5 different metals. Copper was one of them. I don't remember all the other ones, but he chose 5 different metals. And he agreed that the way we would know if they were becoming less available would be they would be more expensive. So they literally waited for 10 years. They checked the price of those 5 metals, and every one of them was cheaper 10 years later than they were when they first made the bet. And Paul Ehrlich had to pay up the $1,000. So it is worth thinking a little bit about that, since really it's true that one of the predicted effects of population growth might be that you think, well, you know what? Resources are going to become more scarce. As they become more scarce, they're going to become more expensive. And for many, many resources, that absolutely has not been true. Oh, yeah, it's true. When I was a kid, you could buy gas for 25 cents a gallon. But now you can buy gas today for what? $1.85 a gallon. That's not that huge of an increase. I've seen it higher than that. Anyway, it's just worth throwing that out, I think. I like throwing out that idea that maybe there is something special about human beings. But here's the thing. We're talking about human population growth. All right, I'm going to double check to make sure I'm still presenting and recording. Let's just remember the lesson of the reindeer, right? There were a certain amount of reindeer, and they were introduced to this island. They started growing. They grew like crazy. They grew exponentially. And we asked, what should be done? because they got to a certain number where they had completely exhausted the resources, and and their population collapsed. So when we think about this, you want to think, okay, so what was the capacity of this island for these deer? What was the carrying capacity? Well, I mean, in some respects, I feel like if there were 1,000 deer, they probably did fine. They kept growing like crazy. 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. Oh my gosh. That was too many, too deer. So if you were a deer, where would your life be best? Would it be best right up here where you are probably pretty close to the carrying capacity? I would say no. If I was a deer, I definitely wouldn't want to live up here, because up here there's resource scarcity, et cetera, problems. And of course, you get close and close to this, suddenly it's really nasty. And then, I mean, this graph is staggering. 5,971 deer died in a very short period of time. They went from 6,000 down to 42. A huge number of deer died. Oh, you definitely don't want to live anywhere near this. So what about down here? I mean, it is true when they first introduced those deer to that island, there was probably tons and tons of resources, and the tons and tons of resources translated into lots of reproduction, and suddenly it's exponential. So if you were a deer and you could choose, where would you want to live? Would you want to live down here where there's just a few deer, or would you want to live here where there's lots of deer but plenty of resources? Would you want to live up here where there's lots of deer and not enough resources? And so then we ask that question, where would we want to live? Well, that is a question we each as humans ask. Do we want to live near the carrying capacity? And I would say no. Because I honestly think that as you approach the carrying capacity, bad things happen. So I wouldn't want to live up here. I'm not sure I'd want to live down here, but I might want to live somewhere in here where it seems like there's plenty of deer. So I got lots of buddies, etc., and lots of opportunities to mate, etc., and plenty of resources. This is where I'd rather live. Okay. So we sort of asked the question, what should have been done? Should we have hunted the deer? Should we have added predators? Should we have moved them to other islands? Should we do nothing and let them starve? I mean, honestly, it is a moral question. Is hunting them a better alternative than just letting them starve to death? If you added predators, well, we know about predators. What happens when you add predators to an ecosystem? Under some circumstances, the predators certainly eat a lot of prey items, but a predator can have a huge impact on an ecosystem, right? I mean, we saw this the other day, how wolves change rivers, how starfish increase the diversity of an intertidal zone. Well, what should have been done? We could think about it all the time. I guess it's a great lesson now, but a lot of deer paid the ultimate price for that. So what about humans? So where is the carrying capacity for humans? I mean, look, we can see right away, here's exponential growth. And we're rocketing up towards exponential growth. We're rocketing up to, billions of people. And so the real question is, what do we want to do here? Do we want to live up here, which might be close to if this is the carrying capacity, when we don't know what the carrying capacity is for human beings? In I think the early 90s, the Population Institute at Cornell, they predicted that they took a look at all the resources of the planet and the people, and they said, look, we feel like the carrying capacity of the Earth for humans is 2 billion at a U.S. standard of living. Remember, I think I mentioned this the other day, that we can talk about what's called the carrying capacity, which is the absolute maximum individuals that can be supported in a certain environment with absolute minimal, you're using the least resources you can. Then there's also something called the cultural carrying capacity, and the cultural carrying capacity includes a quality of life component to it. And that quality of life component is usually added in like this, like that Cornell group, when they said that the carrying capacity of the planet was 2 billion, they said at a US standard of living, if everybody on the planet lived just like we do in the US, the carrying capacity would be 2.1 billion is what I think they said. Well, not everybody lives like people in the US. Some people live better. Some people live worse. I think many people live worse. I guess the question does come down again to if, in fact, the population, the carrying capacity of the Earth is, greater than 8 billion, but the cultural carrying capacity is 2 billion, then from our sort of high quality of living perspective, we're way over the carrying capacity already, and we wonder what would happen. I'm going to say the same thing I said before. Is it useful to think about the carrying capacity for humans? It is. Why? Because if we could estimate the carrying capacity, we could do whatever it takes to avoid living anywhere near the carrying capacity. Because again, living near the carrying capacity is very precarious. The resources are spread very, very thin among the people who are alive. If you were able to determine what the carrying capacity is and live below it, well, then you could have more resources per person. Okay? So the carrying capacity, again, is the maximum number of individuals an area can support forever. The law is, thou shalt not exceed the carrying capacity for long, as Caribou found out. What is the carrying capacity for people on Earth? What do you need to know? Well, you need to know how many resources are out there and how fast they're being replenished. Because, the Earth is able to replenish resources, right? As resources can be created and they can be replenished in some cases. We need to know the absolute minimum rate of resource use needed to sustain an average human, because if we knew, okay, the profit in resources every year, 1 million metric tons, but the average person could live on 1 metric ton of resources a year, well, then we could decide that there would be I lost track of my numbers there. I said 100 million. Said 100 million metric tons of resources. I'm just dragging this off the top of my head. And each person used 1 million metric resources a year. Well, then we could support 100 million people, but we would be at carrying capacity. And all it would take was something crazy to happen, and our population would suddenly experience the horrible things that happen to organisms that exceed the carrying capacity. So if you took the rate of resource replenishment, this is what I said a minute ago, the 100 million metric tons of new resources, and you divide it by the absolute minimum rate of resource use, then to sustain a human being, then you get an estimate of exactly how many people you can squeeze into the Earth. The carrying capacity is that. It's how many new resources there are and the absolute minimum resources that we need to use, and that's the carrying capacity. But for what it's worth, this kind of carrying capacity is not what we really want to live under. I mean, I think the carrying capacity of the Earth would probably be much higher than 8 billion people if everybody was willing to live on a little piece of land, 4 square meters, 2 meters by 2 meters. You just stood there in your little piece of land, and every half hour a helicopter comes by and sprays water so you can drink. And every half hour after that, a helicopter comes by and sprays food out so you can eat. And if you're willing to live like that, we can certainly squeeze lots of people in, but people are not really willing to live like that. The cultural carrying capacity has to do with cultures, and it's the maximum number of individuals an area can support forever at a given standard of living. Look, if you are asked to define this, please use this definition. There are some other weird definitions out there that are not good definitions of the cultural carrying capacity. So what should we do? We know what's going on with birth rates and death rates. what factors affect birth rates, education, affluence, etc. What kind of population control methods are there out there? There's voluntary versus involuntary. There's education laws, incentives, disincentives, all kinds of things. We can, do that. You can make it. You can decide that you're going to have just one child per person, one child per couple. I mean, China tried that, one child policy. So let me show you some data that I extracted from the Population Reference Bureau. And this is data that's extracted from the population data sheets that have been published by the Population Reference Bureau. I got to just point these people out. This is a great place. If you're interested in human population growth, then this is, I thought I could click on this and activate it. I guess not. I don't need to. There it is. This place is called the Population Reference Bureau, and they are constantly collecting data. And of course, you can see, that they are right on top of everything. Lots of stuff about coronavirus and demographic changes and all that kind of stuff. The Population Reference Bureau is designed to help people understand population patterns around the world. This population data sheet, which they are wisely charging people for, it's not very much. It's like $9.99. And honestly, I thought about getting a copy for us to look at. It's very detailed data on just about every country in the globe and their fertility rates and growth rates, etc. But I didn't have time. I didn't get permission from them in time. I told them I was an educator, and they will give me free access to this for sure. So maybe I'll show it to you next time. But anyway, the data that I'm about to show you has been extracted from the Population Reference Bureau data sheet. But this is a great site to look at. They're in Washington, D.C., and they are constantly gathering data about global population patterns. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this chart because I think that this chart, just like some of the things that were mentioned previously in the PowerPoint, are going to suggest possible ways to create humane population control programs. If you are living in that feels like it's overpopulated, and the evidence of that could be that there's not enough room for people. There's too much pollution. And that could be air pollution, water pollution, etc. You see some places these days where the air is. I can't believe people actually breathe the air in some parts of the world. It is so bad. And I guess Los Angeles might be in this group, but there are certainly places that are worse than that, where the air is just horrible. So sometimes we see those kinds of effects because of human population and their behaviors. In some areas of the world right now, the environment seems to be doing a lot better. The air is clean, the skies are blue. Why? Because we've kind of extracted humans from that. And honestly, if all the humans disappeared from the planet Earth, I think the planet Earth would do fine. I don't think the Earth is actually dying. I think humans are, being pretty self-centered and engaging in behaviors that aren't very positive for other organisms on the planet and for resources like air and water, etc. So what I extracted from the population data sheet is what things affect the crude birth rate. And the crude birth rate is exactly what it sounds like. It is the total birth rates on the planet or in a country. And you know a total fertility rate. It's the average number of children born to an individual woman. Okay? So crude birth rate and total fertility rates, these are often used as indicators of population growth. And if you go back in this PowerPoint, you'll see exactly what I mean. But these are used as indicators of population growth. What is the crude birth rate? What is the total fertility rate? Remember that total fertility rates in many of the more developed and affluent countries are below 2. So technically their population should actually be shrinking. But then there are places in the world where the total fertility rate is 6. And so those populations are definitely going to grow. So it'd be interesting to know what affects crude birth rate and total fertility rate, because I want to think about how to create a humane population growth plan. And of course, it's fine to integrate information that you found in that video that we watched earlier in the semester. I hope everybody got a chance. I hope you didn't miss it, because you missed getting to watch an entire classroom of what I would say elementary school kids blowing up condoms. So remember that. And Buddhist monks blessing birth control, and and taxis getting their insurance paid to distribute birth control. So here's some social events, and here's their effects on crude birth rate and total fertility rate. So first, this is a one you're going to be astonished at. The more available birth control there is, the less babies are born. Amazing. When people have access to birth control, they tend to have fewer kids. I mean, again, I wish I had this data, but I think this data is kind of hard to get. But I still think at least 50% of babies that are born are not planned babies, right? They are babies that, well, I think if it wasn't for alcohol, there would probably be quite a few less babies, right? But the bottom line is that if you make birth control available, like you give it, let taxi drivers sell it in their car or whatever, guess what? Crude birth rates and total fertility rates go down. Now, this one's interesting. Infant mortality rate. This is really the number of infants that die in their first year of life. And we could find some data on this, but here's what's been discovered from population reference. If the infant mortality goes up, meaning that the chances that a individual baby will die before its year 1, guess what? People have more babies. I mean, literally, it sounds as if you think we're going to have a baby and it might not live long enough to be, older, a child, etc., well, then you have more children. And, this one seems amazing to me. Here's another one, urbanization, meaning people moving into cities. People who live in cities, guess what? They have fewer children than people who live in the country. Now, I used to think, oh, well, that's logical because people live in the country. Well, they've got a lot of cows that need to be milked. So they're going to have a bunch of kids to get up early and milk those cows. But I doubt that that's true anymore. Once you get into cities, people generally have fewer children. Their crude birth rates and total fertility rates go down. Hey, here's one. As private pension plans go up, like they become more available. And when I say private pension plan, I mean a plan that you get through your employer, a plan that you get through the state, a plan, even Social Security. As the availability of private pension plans goes up, guess what? Crude birth rate and total fertility rate go down. It would be interesting to sort of figure out why this is, but I remember at multiple points in my life hearing people talk about, hey, I need to have a lot of kids because I want those kids to work hard and support me when I'm old. Well, look, if you don't have to worry about having kids take care of your own age, and good luck with that, by the way, then you're less likely to have so many kids. I mean, I like kids, but having kids can be a big struggle for some adults. It's not, it isn't all fun and games for sure. Oh, look at this one. As the importance of child labor goes up, people have more kids. I mean, this is so you can put your kids to work, I guess, to bring home the paycheck. If you live in a place that allows young children to work and earn money, then people are going to have more kids. And that seems amazing to me, but there's good data to support that. Oh, this one is a good one. As overall affluence increases, guess what? People have less kids. The richer a country is, the fewer kids they have. The richer people are, the fewer kids they have. Hey, as educational opportunities for women increase, guess what? They have less children. Crude birth rate, total fertility rates go down if educational opportunities for women increase. Hey, affluence for women, meaning women get paid reasonable salaries. They have the same affluence advantages as men. Well, the more affluent women are, the less children they have. Now, this doesn't mean they won't have any children, but they're not going to have 6 children. Well, maybe it's because as a result of their affluence, that they're affluent because they're working, and that means employment for women is linked to this too. If you increase employment opportunities for women, guess what? They have less kids. So again, I think the essence of this is that when you think about creating a population growth plan, and you want to do it in a humane way in which you're not going to encourage people to have abortions or encourage people to choose the sex of their children like they did in China. So now they've got tons and tons of very unhappy men there who will never, ever find a Chinese wife to marry, and they will never have kids. Bottom line is that there are ways to decrease growth rates that sound like really humane things, right? They sound like really humane things. Like, for example, okay, you don't allow child labor. You don't allow child labor, then people are probably not going to have a bunch of kids so they can go out and support them. You increase private pension plans and guarantee people the ability to survive in their old age, whether they have kids or not, and guess what? They have fewer kids, right? So these to me seem like humane ways to generate a population growth plan. Now, one thing that I didn't have data on, but I know has been studied is, look, the older people are, the less children they have. Remember in Bangkok, they encouraged people to not get married and thereby have kids until they had their careers completely set and they had money in the bank and all that. Well, getting your career completely set, getting money in the bank meant that people weren't having any kids when they were 20. They might be more likely to have kids when they were 30. And the older you are when you have kids, the less kids you're going to have. So here's a link that you might want to look at if you're interested, because we certainly get nothing but bad news these days. But here's a link to 26 charts and maps that show the world is getting much, much better. And it's published a few years ago, but if you'd like to take a look at it, it is worth taking a look at if you're depressed. Oh, things are depressing now, I have no doubt about it. And then there are some really nice TED Talks that deal with population growth and issues related to population growth. And I don't want to run these. These are long. They're TED Talks, so they can range from 15 minutes to an hour or something like that. But anyway, there are some interesting connections here if you are interested in looking at them. Zoom back. Zooming back. And so here I am back at the main class, class business page, because I'm essentially done for tonight. I would be ecstatically happy to answer any kind of question that anybody has about any of this. Again, I've got sort of 2 population quizzes that are in works right now. One of them I'm going to post almost as soon as we're done with this class. It's going to be quiz 16, population ecology. It's going to be due by Wednesday. It's going to be posted as document number 0015. And then I'm going to post quiz number 17 pretty fast. And quiz number 17 is about population growth plan. And so, I mean, there's overlap in these quizzes, but that's fine. Remember, I want to get up in the low 20s when it comes to quizzes, so I can give lots of A's. Okay? So, are there any questions? Let me say, hey, look at this, 24 people still here. How is that possible? If you're asleep, would you raise your hand, please? I haven't heard any snoring, but if you are asleep and you've been asleep for the last 45 minutes, would you do me a favor and raise your hand now so I know how many people are asleep? Because I can't believe that 24 people are out there still awake after this long PowerPoint. But Here's my final comment when it comes to human population growth, okay? Look, it would be real good if we could calculate out the carrying capacity for humans on the planet. It's challenging because, you know, we don't really know. We don't have the data on the natural rate of resource replenishment. So it's hard without good data to figure out what the carrying capacity is. There are people who have suggested the carrying capacity is 2 billion at a US standard of living, cultural carrying capacity. Well, we're way past that, but people don't live like us. Remember, we're in the most developed countries that use 80% of the resources, but only have 20% of the population, right? We're not in the less developed countries that have 80% of the population of the planet and use only 20% of the resources. So my final comment is, look, if you can possibly choose, then you do not want to live anywhere near the carrying capacity. That would be bad, right? Living near the carrying capacity means struggle, barely getting by. You're getting by, but you're just barely getting by, right? It takes 36 beans a day for you to stay alive, and you have to struggle every day to get 36 beans. You know, maybe one day you get 35 and another day you get 37, but you are right on the edge. So when we think about the carrying capacity and the cultural carrying capacity, we don't want to live near the carrying capacity because that is bad. And if we exceed the carrying capacity because we're living too close to it, then that could have profound impacts on people's health and well-being. Now, if we were to ask Julian Simon, and we can't because he's dead, we were to ask Julian Simon, he might completely disagree with me, and that would be fine because he's a pretty smart guy and he's got he had some pretty good ideas and data that that suggests maybe humans don't have to struggle the same way that reindeer do, okay? Caribou do. All right, so if there's no questions, then you know when you'll see me again. I will be back on Wednesday night at 5:45. Now, I won't be in my normal classroom. I apologize. I'm going to be a talking head. And, but that's okay. Judith, did you have a question? I'll check the email. You bet. Absolutely. I will check the email. And again, I'm going to get that next quiz posted immediately. All right.
Mr. Mackey, I have a question about the biodiversity lab. When we're talking about like all the organisms that we need to list, I have frozen food in the refrigerator. Am I supposed to look on the back of the ingredients and list every kind of organism that it possibly could be?
Well, hopefully you don't list every organism it possibly be. On the back of it, it should tell you what the organisms are. Like it'll say blueberries, raspberries, strawberries. You know what I mean? And so it is true that when I tell people to look in their refrigerator, and that include their freezer, you know, there's things if I pulled out of my freezer, like I've got, you know, some Indian food from Trader Joe's. And I'll bet if I look on the back of it, it's going to have at least 10 different organisms that are in it. And so that would be good data to have. Now, do I want people to unpack their deep freezer just to find out what might be lurking at the bottom? No. But, you know, if you have in your freezer something in which you can look at it and immediately identify that there's that there are multiple organisms involved, then I would include those on my list. I mean, we're going to talk about biodiversity soon, specifically, you know, the sort of global biodiversity. But what we're looking at is what organisms contribute to our household in one way or another. And of course, some of those things are going to be alive, like if you have a sugar glider or a bunny or something. But there's plenty of organisms that were alive that contribute to your house. Like cinnamon, perfect example. There's something I really like. It is made from the ground up bark of a cinnamon tree. Coffee, oh my gosh. I mean, you know, ground coffee, of course, was coffee beans that were grown on some, you know, rugged hillside in South America or wherever. But when it's in your house, you are consuming another organism. You know, in an ecology class, it's
So,
always
Mr.
good.
Mackey, what about like seasonings of sorts?
Oh yeah, seasonings absolutely count because cinnamon was a seasoning, right? And so seasonings absolutely. I mean, garlic, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, turmeric. Oh my gosh! I mean, there's a long list. Every one of those things just about represents an organism. So, you know, again, I'm not going to be thinking, I better see a list of 57 organisms or else I'm not going to give full credit. No, I think that probably if people were really exhaustive, they could find 50 different organisms in their home. But, I'm not going to be, I want you to think about the organisms that contribute to your home ecosystem. I don't want you to go crazy. But again, if you started by looking at your spice rack, you're likely to find a dozen organisms there. I've got some mixtures of spices that have 10 different organisms in there. So did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, can I just make one comment? I'm not going to come to your home and look way in the back of your freezer to see if you missed something. Okay, I promise I won't. So, make a reasonable list that impresses you and impresses me, and we'll be fine. All right, I'm stopping the recording now because I think that's what I need to do.